In this video I'm going to be showing you a few of my favourite species of moss growing here in the UK which are suitable for terrarium use, as well as some to avoid. It's only recently that I've started learning more about moss species, and I have a limited knowledge on the few local species that I have come to use and collect, let alone the 1,000+ species which call the UK home. I want to share the knowledge I've gained on these species and my passion for the underappreciated plant group. Moss is a bryophyte, meaning it doesn't produce flowers and grows and spreads through spore release or branching, often going under the radar and unnoticed, slowly creeping at every opportunity. This doesn't mean to say it isn't a wonderful plant, and the beauty of moss is in its subtlety, ability to thrive and survive, and close-up, ancient and intimate relationships with the forest and everything in it. So this is the first species of moss I want to show you. It can be found growing in most areas, urban and rural. It grows on rocks. All it needs is a little bit of moisture and quite prominent sunlight. You'll see it growing on the tops of roofs, in buildings, in urban areas. And it's this stuff. Just see me pick it up next to the canal. It's called Pincushion Moss. You can kind of see why it's called Pincushion Moss. Sort of looks like a pin cushion you'd stick little pins into. So this Pincushion Moss is not the best stuff for terrariums because of where it grows in quite light conditions on rocks and things like that. It doesn't like growing in soil too much or on top of soil, and terrariums are usually quite low light environments with high humidity. This species of moss is quite different and unique in the fact that it likes quite high light, doesn't mind a drier environment, which is why it grows on exposed rockwork and things like that, and doesn't need that moisture retention that soil has. So I'd kind of stay away from this species, Pincushion. It tends to go browner in the terrariums, and I think that's because they quite like good air quality and quite a lot of wind and airflow, and that's represented by the places in which they grow, which are quite exposed and often have a decent breeze blowing across them. So this stuff, although it looks beautiful, it can be used. I wouldn't say it's the best stuff. So we'll move on to the next species. So this specific species of moss is actually quite hard to find and is quite rare in a lot of places, but I'm lucky enough to be able to find it here because we have the right conditions. This is called Sphagnum Moss or bog moss. This specific species is either spiky sphagnum moss or lesser cowhorn bog moss. And this stuff is a terrarium keeper's absolute best friend. It's so good for terrariums. Not only can it be used alive, just like that, in the terrarium, obviously without the leaves, but you can actually dry this stuff out, sphagnum moss. You'll see it in supermarkets, things like that. And when you dry it out, what happens is the plant material becomes really, really good at then, when it's reabsorbing moisture, at holding that moisture. Once this is dead, obviously it won't try and grow and use the moisture, it will just hold it. And once this stuff is dead, it kind of goes brown. Can be used in terrariums if you give it really good spray, make it nice and moist as a great planting substrate. Wicks moisture really well, great for planting plant roots into. And yeah, this stuff is great for terrariums, both alive and dead, but obviously rehydrated. So yeah, sphagnum moss. Usually found in really, really boggy and damp areas, hence the name, bog moss. And this is one of the perfect places, super boggy. There's a stream that runs through here, and it's covered quite nicely with a sparse covering of trees, allowing just the right amount of light in for this species to thrive here. And this stuff is absolutely gold in terrariums. So this really beautiful and impressive formation of moss is called, it's a species of haircat moss. This could either be bank haircap or common haircap, and it grows in these massive clumps, and this stuff is super thick. It's great for use in terrariums. I've used it, had it thrive before, and yeah, lovely stuff. This grows in these great big formations on almost mounds. You can see one here, there's one there as well, and a couple in the distance. And this stuff is beautiful. I used to call it star moss because I thought it looked like stars. So I love this little section here. Growing next to this big bank of haircat moss, which I've just featured, is this lovely neat feather moss. and it's just intermingling in that haircat moss, and it looks so beautiful. But this stuff, neat feather moss, a variation of the common feather moss, just a little bit tighter in those fractals, is great for terrariums too. I've used this multiple times, and these two shades of green I think complement each other so well, with this sort of more limey green adapting into the lighter coloured green, and I think that looks absolutely beautiful. And both of these are great to use in terrariums. So yeah, we've got the neat feather moss and the haircat moss just up top there. So growing on this piece of fallen wood here is probably the most common species of moss you'll find in damp areas. It grows on dead wood, grows on living trees, and this stuff is just called feather moss. I used to call it fern moss because it has quite fern-like fractals, but yeah, this feather moss, absolutely great to use in terrariums. I would say this is by far the most consistent type of moss. It will provide results and it will grow well in terrariums. Low light conditions, high humidity, grows on soil, grows on dead wood, and absolutely great. It will thrive in a terrarium environment, loves high humidity, and I would really recommend this stuff. You cannot miss it. If you go out for a walk in nature, this stuff is absolutely everywhere. So just a little bit further up from that common feather moss and the fine feather moss is this beautiful stuff. Intermingled with this haircap, which I've just featured earlier, is this stuff. This lime green stuff is what I'm talking about, sort of a variation in colour. Just these ones here, and this stuff is called Tamarisk Moss. This moss is a really easy find in most damp forests. The one thing which makes this really easy to identify Tamarisk Moss, not only is the colour and the fern-like fractals which it produces, and I actually used to call this stuff small fern moss, or tree creeping fern moss, because it always grows, or predominantly I have found this stuff growing on fallen dead wood. So it loves gripping onto that bark, that rotting wood, and just growing off of that substrate. So what I usually do in terrariums with this stuff, because I don't like taking this moss off of its substrate, is I'll take a small twig or a branch which has fallen down and is already established with this tamarisk moss, take that home and just put that in the terrarium, because that is already established on that growing medium, it's adapted to it, and it will just make the transition into terrarium life a little bit easier for this tamarisk moss. And this stuff is absolutely great, wicks water really well, provides a good bit of foliage, nice textures and colours, and yeah, provides really good coverage in terrariums and grows amazingly. So I'd really recommend this stuff if you can find it, Tamarisk Moss. So this beautiful species of moss is called beard moss. I think it's a species of beard moss anyway. It's like cushiony and it's amazing. Growing on this man-made structure, and I have used some of this in terrarium as well. So why do I love moss so much, and why am I making a video all about moss? Take this lovely bank of moss for example. A lot of people would just walk past this, not look twice, but to me, if you look really closely, and it's that miniature aspect, moss is so beautiful. I think that's why it does so well and looks so beautiful in terrariums, because it really takes that scale down. When you come in from afar, it could look nice, it kind of looks like a grassy lawn, but when you come really far in, like I've just found this little cave feature here, it looks absolutely amazing. Just clear those leaves away. This is what got me distracted, just this little formation here. If you really scale that down, I mean, it's like a small cliff face, the rocks protruding from the soil there, and the moss just taking advantage. Those shadows it's creating as well, and that contrast with the sunlight, and all those different varieties of moss and lichen. So beautiful. See, I wish I could just, this gives me such inspiration. I wish I could just take that little piece home and place it in a tank. Obviously you can't, but you can try your best to recreate something like that, which I think just looks absolutely amazing. But moss is one of those things, it's so primal, it's been there from the start. It's a pioneer species, which means that moss will find the places which are barren, new islands being formed today by volcanoes. They're barren, they need to be seeded with something. Moss will find that area. They're a pioneer species, and they will be able to hold on in places where other plants can't is because they can survive with little nutrients just on the top of a rock or something with a sufficient amount of sunlight and rain, and moss will thrive. When moss eventually dies and breaks down, it releases that nutrient and creates a substrate layer, which is what more mature plants and larger plants and then trees can eventually grow on. So it's really moss which provides that nutrient which the rest of the forest needs in order to kickstart it and get it going before that leaf litter and all of the other processes can start to kick in to continue the process. So moss is really good for that. Not only that, but moss nowadays is what I like to use moss for is in terrariums and also for pictures, obviously, especially miniature scale pictures. But it's great for terrariums because it loves all of the conditions that terrariums provide, from low light condition. I'm in a forest right now, usually in summer. This would be densely covered by thick foliage, allowing quite little sunlight to get through. Even in winter, although the sunlight can get through, there's not that much of it and it's not as intense as the summer. So moss does really well in those low light conditions. It also loves humidity and dampness. That's why it does well here in the temperate forests of England. And terrariums will recreate that environment. The moisture is kept in often in a contained environment, and moss loves that. So there's the light intensity, it loves the humidity, and also terrarium substrate, really easy. Moss loves growing on all sorts of varieties, from the soil here in the wild, which can be easily replicated in a terrarium, to things like fallen dead wood, like what my phone is sitting on right now. And that stuff can just be picked up, broken down and placed into a terrarium. It's a pre-made substrate which can be transported easily and used there. Things like Tamarisk Moss loves growing on fallen dead wood, and it kickstarts that process of as well of breaking down that wood to further release the nutrients. So it can allow access to fungi and the mycelium by breaking down that wood with its roots. Especially tamarisk loves to do that and root into that dead wood, and that's why any piece of wood which is in a boggy area which you find will be well broken down by moss, as well as that humidity and moisture as well. But the moss getting into it, allowing all of the other sorts of fungus and reproducers and recyclers to access that material and allow that nutrients to be released for the future generation of the forest. So moss is just a great aspect. It's beautiful, it does an awesome job, and when loads of people come to fully respect it, like I think people should have moss lawns in their garden. I love the look of that. It's commonly used in Japan and widely respected in Japan, moss as well. And I'd love that to continue around the world because it is so beautiful. It's lovely to touch, it's nice and soft, and when you're really coming close, it's amazing to look at. That is why I absolutely love moss.